Good morning. And so I want to just say how much I'm just so honored to be here. So I feel such a sense of blessing and purpose and to be here today and to join you. So Sergio mentioned that this is what we hope will be the first of many opportunities for us to share together. And so when Karen called me and said to me that there was an opportunity for me to possibly come, I was really excited. And then she said that Sergio would be joining me, so I was equally as excited about that. Because Sergio is really a leader within the Clinical Translational Science Awards community and has done a lot to really help advance this whole issue of community engagement. When I walked in, I knew I was in Michigan when I heard the sounds of Motown. I thought, only in Ann Arbor would you be playing the Temptations and the Four Tops and all of that. And so I really felt like I was at home. I want to thank Adam for working with us. He's worked with both Sergio and I to help perfect our presentations and all that. Karen, to Mark, who I've had an opportunity to meet and have dinner with last night. Really appreciate your invitation and your trusting us to come and share with you today. I also want to recognize some very good friends of mine, Kent Key, Mrs. Deloney, who's sitting back there, and also Ella Green Moten. So Sergio was saying that I know a lot of people in Michigan. I said, yes, I hope I continue to know a lot of people in Michigan after I present today. And so I have, and I use these terms fondly, that we have actually kind of established what we call the North Carolina Mafia and the Michigan Mafia. And I'm part of the North Carolina Mafia that's based at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And we use that fondly to really describe the fact that we have some really strong community leaders. And I know that these three individuals have really forged and continue to fight for the community and advocate on behalf of the community. So there's a little bit of machismo, if you will, in us. And I've learned certainly a lot from them, and I'm just glad to be here today. So this presentation that I will share with you, and when we were talking about presenting today, Sergio really laid a tremendous foundation for you to think more academically about it, and I'm just going to try to translate some of the things that he shared from the community's perspective and tell my perspective of this issue. So that within the CTSA world, we know that the academics have really led the way within research. And people like Kent, Ms. Deloney, Ella, and others, many of you here today that I don't know, I hope to have an opportunity to meet, and myself have really been forging and really talking and advocating for the community such that there's more community leadership in this process. And so I thought I would kind of give you that perspective of why I really think you need to be involved in what really I've come to understand and really appreciate is the research enterprise. So let's get started here today. So I want to talk about three things today, primarily why I believe you should be engaged in research, how do you engage in research, and then just look at what are the things that I believe that we as community leaders and community advocates need to really be engaged in that research. So everything is about food with me, and so I was out at dinner last night with Mark, and Mark is quite a foodie, if you don't know that, and I also am a foodie. I have, you can look at me and tell from my size that I have not missed a meal in my life, nor do I plan to miss a meal, but I really enjoy food, and so I was really thinking about preparing for this. So my boss has this saying, and I want to share this with you, and she likens getting funding or resources to eating apple pie or getting apple pie at your grandmother's house. And if you're a member of a family like mine, the rule is that you have to be present in order to get a piece of the pie. People do not bring you pieces of the pie. They do not deliver pieces of the pie. In fact, after we have eaten the dinner, there is no pie left. And so the moral of that story is that if you're going to get a piece of the pie, you have to be at the table. And she talks about that so much. And in thinking about this presentation, if there's nothing else that you take away from it, from my presentation, this segment of it, it's the story of the apple pie. So you have to be at the table to get a piece of the apple pie. Now remember, the pie is going to be sliced, not always equally, but it will be sliced. And if you're going to get a piece of the pie, you have to be at the table. So let's look at NIH in particular. We hear a lot about the National Institute of Health. And the National Institute of Health, which really funds the Clinical Translational Science Award, is really about science. It's how to deliver exemplary services to improve the health of Americans. NIH will only fund something when it is translated into scientific terms. And so as we think about that, I want to ask you a question that NIH is focused on scientific discovery. So how many of you are currently working in the community in some capacity and really believe, well, just let me ask you that. How many of you are working in the community at this point? You're community-based, community-placed. Okay, thank you. How many of you think and feel very strongly that your work is really exemplary work, best practices, promising practices? Okay, thank you. So that's great. But that means nothing to NIH, absolutely nothing. And I'm going to tell you this in the terms that I've really come to understand and appreciate. NIH is about scientific discovery. It's about qualitative and quantitative measures. As such, we have to really begin as community leaders to really understand and appreciate the research enterprise and NIH or CDC or what other funders are really looking for and really kind of grab a hold of that. And that's not something always that's easy, nor is it something that we oftentimes kind of go along with. Sometimes we have to be brought along kicking and screaming, but it's something that I really encourage you to embrace if you want to get a piece of the pie. So when we look at the goals of NIH, it's really about discovery, interventions, inventions, and science. So I was looking at the NIH website, and I was just kind of blown away. I just wanted to figure out how much is the annual NIH budget. So the annual NIH budget for this current fiscal year is $30.9 billion. $30.9 billion. Now, how many of you could do a little something something with $30.9 billion? Okay, so let me see those hands again. Most of you, right? There are 50,000 grants awarded this fiscal year through NIH, and that includes 2,500 universities or academic centers are grantees. Now, much of that money is actually spent on scientific work and discoveries and inventions that are occurring in Bethesda on the campus of NIH. But there's a large portion of that that is also being shared and disseminated through academic institutions and other parts of the research enterprise. So looking at Michigan, NIH funding in Michigan, and actually when I looked at this slide again, I started to actually redo it because I actually undercounted. So just roughly, the current level of NIH funding in Michigan, there are 236 awards from NIH in the state of Michigan, totaling $84 million. For the University of Michigan, an estimate approximately 167 awards, totaling $64 million. That's a lot of money. Again, trying to get a piece of the pie. So in North Carolina, where I live, and at the partner that I work primarily with, there are 292 awards in North Carolina, totaling approximately $111 million. So I had to really go back, it's like, you remember counting, learning how to count when you were like in elementary school? It's like ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, and it goes up from there. How many of you remember that? That's like old school counting, right? And so I had to kind of really go through that and say, okay, that's 691,000. So if I add 3 more, that's 111 million. So at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, there are approximately 115 awards totaling $45 million. One school, one state receiving that kind of money. Again, getting a piece of the pie. This is very simple. You can only get a piece of the pie if you're at the table. So I'm going to make you hungry, right? So Sergio alluded earlier to the Clinical Translational Science Awards. And when he shared his presentation with me, one of the slides that really caught my attention was when he talked about our network. So Sergio mentioned to you that he and I serve as co-chairs along with Lord MICHR at Duke University, co-chairs of the Key Functions Committee for the Community Engagement Core. That there are 60 CTSAs, and again, the total amount that NIH is supporting those institutions with is about $500 million or $500 million a year. And what I will say to you is that this $500 million just represents NIH's portion to the CTSA. This does not include the amount of money that many of the institutions are also giving to support their CTSA. In the case of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, I'm not sure how much that award is, but that the university, through its funding mechanisms and through its indirect costs, is able to also support and match a large portion of the money that they receive from NIH. So if they were giving, say, half, if the half of that was a match, it would almost total $1 billion. It would be something like, $700 million that is going to support just one funding mechanism or stream through NIH. Again, it's a large chunk of money. So within the Clinical Translational Science Award, the Key Functions Committee and Community Engagement Core, we have several work groups. In fact, we do most of our work through work groups. So Ella and Kent and Mr. Loney and I have, for the last, I guess, almost 10 years or more, have been doing a lot of work with the National Community-Based Organization Network and the Community CCPH, the caucus, and again, most of our work is done through work groups. So the CTSA is organized and does its work through work groups as well. One of the work groups that they've established that really focuses on the community is called the Community Partners Integration Work Group. And I want to recognize the leadership of that work group, and that's Corliss McKeever, Consuelo Wilkins, and Neely Williams. And they're doing a tremendous job in really helping us to better understand the current role and how community representatives are engaged in the CTSA network. And so one of the projects that they ventured into was a study that they did related to specifically the role of community partners within the Clinical Translational Science Awards. Now, let me just say that CTSA, Key Functions Committee, that is a mouthful. I mean, all of these acronyms that we use, it gets really kind of confusing. But let me just step back and say the Clinical Translational Science Award was really established, and from my perspective, to really help to speed up the discovery of new interventions and inventions that will help improve the nation's health. Again, NIH is about funding research. And the Clinical Translational Science Awards, the different universities, the 60-plus universities that are engaged in that network, are doing a variety of work independently, but also collaboratively across the network to address interventions and inventions that will improve the nation's health and to actually speed that process up. And so we wanted to understand how were people like you, many of you that work in the community, how are you actually involved within the Clinical Translational Science Awards? Again, getting a piece of the pie, we're talking about $500 million. So we define community representatives as being a person whose primary affiliation is with a non-academic, non-research, community-based organization, or CBO, and who represents a defined community within the geographic area covered by the CTSA. So I am not an academic. I am considered a community representative. So I do not work at UNC, but I work with them on a number of projects, serving on community advisory boards and expert panels. So when we looked at this, we conducted a research, the Community Partners Integration Work Group actually did a survey of the Clinical Translational Science Award sites and asked the principal investigator and staff at each of the CTSAs to actually respond to a survey that would help us to, again, better understand how engaged were community representatives within the Clinical Translational Science Awards. And what we discovered and what we determined was that, that approximately 94% of those that responded indicated that the community representatives were primarily working within the community engagement core. This is good. That's good, 94%. And that approximately 39% were actually working in external advisory boards and other capacities. And what we realized was that the role of the community representatives was primarily, when it's all said and done, is focused primarily within the community engagement core. While that's good that they're involved in the core, it does concern us that they're not more broadly dispersed within the other cores. And there are probably 10 different cores. Some people have streamlined their cores. And so, again, we need more leaders to be more engaged in this process. Not less, but more. So when we looked at the community advisory boards, when we asked the question, define or describe the ways in which the community representatives are engaged in the CTSA, the study showed that approximately 90% of them were members of the community advisory board. So how many of you are part of a community advisory board or expert panel or some group like that? Can I see your hand? Quite a few of you are involved in that. We need more of you involved in community advisory boards, not less, but more. And we need you there because we need to really begin to try to eat at or get a larger piece of this pie. It's $500 million, and we're trying to get more of it. So most often the CABs, the community advisory boards, meet quarterly, monthly, and some of them, twice a year or so. Again, when you look at the further analyze this data, it shows that only, again, that their role is primarily within the community engagement core and not in some of the other areas that there are. And the other areas include, let me just go back. It told me not to do this yet. So at the bottom, you'll look at this, the last bullet, you'll see some of the other areas or cores that there are. There's tracking and evaluation, research, design, and biostatistics, methodologies, biomedical informatics, all of those. Okay. So when we look at leadership roles within the Clinical Translational Science Awards, that again, there are limited opportunities to influence the CTSAs. And again, we need to really be present. We're working nationally through a number of networks to really increase the participation of community representatives on institutional review boards, on writing teams. And we really need more of you to be involved in leadership roles, not just within the Clinical Translational Science Award, but also in all of the awards that are given to different academic institutions. So I just want to continue to drive that point home. So again, the finding or the takeaway message to me is that community representation in other areas is highly variable, but minimal to modest in most cases. And so that's really, to me, kind of alarming. So as it relates to time commitments, because I know that many of you will say, I would do more, but I don't have the time to do it. So there is some variability as it relates to the time commitments that community representatives have been asked to commit to this whole Clinical Translational Science Award. And the time commitments, vary from 2 to 4 hours a month, to 5 to 10 hours a month or less. The linchpin, if you will, of all of this is that I make no apologies in saying that community representatives should be compensated for their time, for their commitment, for their expertise in research. So time translates to dollars. And so I'm at an academic institution, and so I may not get invited back, but that's okay. Well, it's not really okay because I have friends here. But I think that people have to understand that community people at this point, we get it. We know that everyone gets paid. Everyone gets paid in the process. Principal investigators get paid. Research team members get paid. Statisticians get paid. Data analysis, data entry people, all of those folk get paid. And we should get paid for the work that we do. And so when we looked at the methods of compensation, one of the things that really concerned us was that a little bit like 22% were not compensated at all. Now, I will say that the compensation is in direct correlation to the amount of time that community representatives are being asked to support this type of work. But it includes honorarium, travel, meals, and all of that. And I will just say as a footnote to this that, compensation for travel and meals, well, I mean, come on now. I'm not coming if you're not going to feed me. I like apple pie. And the very least you could do is actually pay people for their travel, at the very least. And I will say that it does concern me that for, in some instances, there is no compensation at all. And so we really do need to do better, again, to really support our academic partners with getting a larger piece of the pie. So the barriers, and there are many barriers, and I can tell you all of the barriers that I have felt as a community representative when I've been called upon to be involved in this process, but they vary. It's limited time, but I do want to highlight the fact that one of them includes a negative history and a relationship between the academic institution and the community, and then the lack of trust. And that really stands as a significant barrier, but I do believe that MICHR, with events like today, your being together, being here at the in an academic setting, really helps to tear down the walls and helps to support and build trust between academics and the community. I think that my recommendation, hadn't thought about it, but I think we're moving towards having this event in a more community setting, where we began to place this not just in the academic setting, but also in the community setting. This is a beautiful, beautiful building. And it's wonderful, but we really need to move towards thinking like that, being community placed and community spaced as well. And these are just, recommendations. Because again, all of these things serve to tear down the wall and help to really strengthen the commitment that people have to research. So there were several recommendations that came out of this study. And again, this was just one study looking at the role of community representatives within the Clinical Translational Science Awards. But Clinical Translational Science Awards, there's CDC funding, there are other streams of funding mechanisms through NIH, CDC, there's philanthropic dollars, all of it. But I think that this really helps to shed some light. And this is one of the reasons why I was so glad that they undertook this project, because I felt like it was the first time we really could kind of quantify in a very tangible, scientific way how community representatives were really engaged in this process. And it really serves as a platform for us. The next phase of this research is we've actually reached out and survey the institutions. And I want to say I really applaud institutions for being open and honest and talking about issues of trust, because that's not something that we oftentimes talk about. The next phase of this is to actually survey community representatives within the Clinical Translational Science Awards, asking them some of these same questions and seeing what their response is like. And that also will be more telling and help us to better understand this whole issue. So Sergio, I borrowed another one of his slides, presented to you a slide earlier about how to improve and the benefits of community academic partners. And I added one thing at the bottom of that, so I don't have a pointer. So at the bottom of that, I added the comments, economically strong and vibrant communities. In a time when we really understand and appreciate the correlation between economics and health, the $500 million that's coming, out of NIH and all of the billions of dollars in this nation that are going to research, really we need to begin to think about how can those funds be used to really create, support, and sustain economically strong and vibrant communities. What does that mean to me? What that means is that people in communities would then begin to be employed through using these research dollars, that the money would help to revitalize buildings within low-income communities. And I know NIH dollars are not for building, but I think that we have to think about how can these dollars really begin to get into our communities where the health and outcomes are so poor, and support our communities through this. At least at a minimum, creating job opportunities and educating and helping to increase the number of minority youth that are going into health-related careers. At this point in my life, I'm actually encouraging all of my young friends and cohorts to go to college, but not just go to college, not just to get a master's degree, but get a PhD. Get a terminal degree so that you can actually be part of this research enterprise and bring some of those dollars back into communities. For me, it's about getting a piece of the pie. And I hope that through this presentation today, it's just kind of sparked your interest and made you think about how much money there is in research, why you should be involved. I tell people all the time, and I'll close on this. So I'm very involved in prostate cancer advocacy work. And so I was at this national conference and attended for several years. And this guy kept saying to me, so when were you diagnosed with prostate cancer? And I said, I don't have prostate cancer. Oh, so your father has prostate cancer? No. You have a brother with prostate cancer? No. And then he said to me, well, why are you here if you don't have prostate cancer? He just could not imagine that someone would be attending a conference and giving time and energy to the issue of prostate cancer if they didn't have prostate cancer. I said, it's not about me. It's about the people in my community. It's about the people that I go to church with. It's about the people that I see on a weekly basis. It's about my community. And I think that you have to think about it from that same perspective, that in terms of getting a piece of the pie, it's not just about you, but it's about the people in your community. Thank you.